In this video, I'm going to show to you how you can scrape the email of the Instagram followers of your competitors. And for that, we're going to use make.com, Airtable, and RapidAPI. As you can see, we're going to build this make scenario, but don't worry at all because at the end of the video, I'm going to show you where you can get it completely for free. But first, we're going to take a look to our database setup that is equally important and is going to be built in Airtable. And as you can see here, we have three different tables. We have the table keys, we have the table emails, and we have the table accounts. And I'm going to explain what are we doing in every table and what are the fields that we are using. In the accounts table, what we're going to do is to include all the Instagram accounts that we want to scrape the emails of the followers. And here we have different fields. We have the user field, we have the launch scraping field that is actually a button that is a concatenation of the webhook URL sending the parameter scrape ID that equals to the record ID. So then in our table, we can retrieve all the information from that record. And then we have the page that equals to the number of API calls that we need to do to the followers API. Then another super important field is the pagination token, because when we're working with large datasets over 1,000 followers, we're going to need several API requests in order to retrieve all the followers and all the email of those followers. Then here we have a scrape ID that is actually the record ID of the Airtable record. Now let's go to the next table, that is the emails table. And as you can see here, we have only 4 fields. The first one is the email that we have scraped with our make.com scenario. Then we also have the name of the account, and then we also have the link record field to the accounts table that actually shows the account scraped that we have obtained this email from. Last, we have this Instagram URL that is basically a button field where we can quickly open the Instagram account of the follower. So in this case, it's going to be this Angelis_dim. So now let's go to the next table, that is the keys table, and actually super important because it's going to save us a lot of manual setup. We are importing the make.com scenario into our account. And as you can see, we have 2 records. The first one is Instagram Scraper API / get followers, and the second one is Instagram Scraper API / info. And basically, those are unique identifiers that we have for the APIs. Then we also have the URL field, the host field, and the key field. And all these fields are going to be variables that we're going to include in our make.com scenario whenever we're doing the HTTP request. So then we don't need to include all the information in the HTTP request manually, and then we just need to substitute our API keys here and here. Now I'm going to show you the exact API that I'm using from RapidAPI, and I'm going to show you the 2 endpoints URL that we're using. And as you can see, we're using this API that is Instagram Scraper API. And the 2 endpoint URLs that we're using is get info, details, and contact, and get followers. And this API has a free plan where you can do 500 API requests completely for free. And now we're going to see how to build a make scenario. So as you can see, we're starting the make scenario with a webhook. And the first thing that you actually need to do is to create your own webhook. And then this webhook, what we're going to do is to go to the accounts table and then make sure that whenever we are creating the launch scraping button, we are concatenating the webhook URL that in this case is this one with the question mark scrape ID equal and then the variable scrape ID. And what we achieve when we do this is to basically obtain the record ID that we're going to use it later in the Airtable get a record module. Now let's go back to make.com and let's take a look to the next module. As you can see, and I just mentioned, here we're going to get the use. And basically here we're going to use an Airtable get a record module that is going to include as a variable the scrape ID that we have obtained from the webhook. And if you want to include the variable, the only thing that you need to do is to type here curly braces, then while scrape ID, and close the curly braces. And as you can see, you are going to include the variable that is going to be the record ID or scrape ID that we have in our table. So I'm going to delete this one, and I'm going to close this one. In the next step, we're going to use this set a variable module. And actually, this step is not 100% mandatory because we can actually use directly this pagination token variable. We're going to set up the pagination token with a set a variable module. Then we're going to search the API for get followers, and we're going to use this exact formula. And as you can see, we're going to do this formula that is API equal quotation mark Instagram Scraper API / get follower. That is indeed the perfect match of the API name that we have over here. And what we're going to achieve with that search a record module is to have as variables the URL, the host, and the key that later we're going to be able to use in the API calls. Now let's go back to make.com and let's take a look to the next module. And we're going to close this one, and as you can see here, we're going to use exactly a search a record module. In this case, we're going to search the API of get info. And here, the formula is going to be exactly the same. And in this case, we're going to write Instagram Scraper API / info. And the reason why we're doing this is because if we go back to Airtable and to the keys table, in this API field, the one that actually has the perfect match is this API that we have here, Instagram Scraper API/info. And here, as we did before, we're going to obtain as variables the URL, the host, and the key. And now let's go finally with the first HTTP request. And as you can see here in make.com, the first HTTP request, the URL is a variable, and actually we have obtained it from this search API get followers. Then we have this parameter that is actually a header, is x/rapidapi/key, and then with the value that we have obtained from this module as well, then x/rapidapi/host, then this variable that we have obtained also from this module, and then these are three query strings that are super important. First is the username or ID or URL, and basically here we can input both username, ID of the account, or URL. And in this case, we're just inputting the username. But if you prefer to input the URL or the user ID, it also works. And here, as you can see, we're using the variable that we are obtaining from this getUser_getARecord Airtable module. Then the other two parameters that we're going to include as query string is the amount of followers that we want to scrape, that in this case is 1,000, that is actually the maximum, and the pagination token. And the pagination token in this case is super important because in case that is empty in Airtable, the scraping is going to start from the very beginning. But in case that we have done several scrapings before, we need the pagination token because if not, we're going to scrape the same followers again and again. So when we are doing this API call, we're going to obtain a pagination token that we're going to include in Airtable. And if we want to scrape the same user again, that pagination token is going to be already here. Then you also have to set the body type as raw, then the content type JSON, application JSON, and then we're going to parse the response. Now in the next step, what we're going to do is to update the record that we have retrieved with this getUser module. And basically we're going to update it with the pagination token because as I mentioned, it's super important. So let's go now to the next step. And as you can see here, we have the iterator. And in this case, we need to iterate over the data that we are obtaining here because as you can see, there is several items inside this collection. And what we are doing with this iterator is to basically separate each follower from this API request. Because as you can see here from this API request, we have obtained data. And then here inside data, we see that there is 1,019 items. And we need to iterate over each one of those items because then we're going to use the iterated usernames individually in the next API call. So here, the variable that you need to use is actually this one, okay? And I'm going to delete this one. And here, as you can see, we have a filter. And this filter is actually super important because it's going to save us API calls. Because in those accounts that are private, we don't even need to do the API call because we cannot scrape the contact information from accounts that are private. So in this case, basically, we just select this is private variable, and now we go to the next API call. As you can see here in this API call getInfo, we are using all the variables that we have obtained in the sixth module, that is this search API getInfo. And the only value that we actually need to pass here is the username or ID or URL. And the username that we are obtaining and the username that we are using is basically the user that we have obtained with the iterator in the previous step. Then we just need to use the same settings, body type, raw, content type JSON, application JSON, and then to parse the response. Now we're almost finishing, and as you can see here, there is another filter. And this filter, what it's going to do is to check if there is an email in the bio or if there is a public email as contact information. And if there is none of those conditions, basically we are not going to let pass that data bundle. Now after this API call and this filter, basically we have only the data bundles that have an email available. But there is one condition that we actually need to filter. And it's basically those users that have an email in the bio and also an email in the contact information. And for those cases, we're using this setVariable module because when using this or operator, what we're doing is in case that there is two emails, we're just selecting only one of them. Now let's go to the last module, and as you can see here, it's very simple because we're going to create a new record in the emails table that is going to be the set email that we have taken from the previous set variable module. I'm going to include the account that we have obtained from this API call. And then we're also going to include the record ID of this get user that is going to actually link the original account that we are scraping the followers to the follower that we have scraped and to the lead that we have obtained. And now if you want to obtain this make scenario and the Airtable database so you can scrape the emails of the followers of your competitors, I'm going to leave a link in the description where you can join my community where you are going to be able to download this template and access to other templates. The community is completely free, and inside you're going to be able to connect with other people that is into automations and no code, and access to a ton of resources that are going to help you to learn more about automations and no code. Last, I hope that you found value on the video, and if you liked it, please like and subscribe because it really helps a lot.